Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Bennett, and I am from the United States, Richmond, Virginia area. And today I am presenting my project on trauma-informed student-centered teaching in SEL, social emotional learning. Today I will be discussing trauma-informed student-centered teaching as it applies to high-risk youth. This presentation draws from both research and my professional experience working with students who have experienced significant adversity, system involvement, disengagement, out of home placement, any measurement that particularly puts a child at high risk. I will begin by explaining the trauma-informed student-centered teaching method and analyzing its strengths and limitations. Next, I will explore how classroom interactions influence students' motivation. I will then evaluate assessment practices in SEL and conclude with recommendations grounded in learning theory. Teaching method overview. Trauma-informed Trauma-informed teaching recognizes that many students carry emotional stress that impacts learning. This approach prioritizes emotional safety and relationships before academic demands. In an SEL setting, this means explicitly that emotional regulation, communication, and decision-making skills is what the primary focus is, and not necessarily academics. A major strength of this approach is engagement through trust building. In my experience, students are more willing to participate when they feel respected. However, progress can be really slow and it requires a lot of patience, especially for students who are accustomed to rigid systems. So when you have these students that are coming from different environments, such as group homes, foster care, uh, whether it be if they were homeless, um, different environments, and you have all of these children with so many different needs put together in one pot. It really requires a lot of patience. Let me go back a slide there. I do want to talk about the limitations a little bit. It is very time intensive because you really have to build relationships and it requires a lot of consistency. So, a real classroom example, um, when we have our melting pot of students, um, and they come in initially, we've experienced disengagement. So that's really real life. And then we really have to work on relationship building. And after that relationship building happens, then what we will see is increased participation. We typically see this, and subjective means not objective. I've worked with youth who are involved with DSS, probation, who initially refused to engage. But through consistent check-ins and respectful communication, these students begin to participate more actively and they begin to start setting their own goals as well. So assessment practices in SEL, again, I mentioned that objective assessments don't typically work. So formative assessments, reflective journals, emotional check-ins, and goal setting. SEL assessments focus on growth rather than grades. These assessments allow students to reflect on emotions and behaviors in a supportive environment. There's impact on engagement and performance. We see reduced anxiety and increased honesty, better regulation and improved decision-making skills. When assessments are reflective rather than punitive, students remain engaged and show growth in emotion regulation and decision-making skills. We do have challenges with assessments. It's difficult to quantify growth. Very difficult. These are subjective measures. And then again, as I mentioned earlier in a couple of slides prior, there are time constraints. SEL growth is difficult, very difficult to measure, other than traditional grading systems, but these traditional grading systems will often fail to capture the progress. Um, so we really have to be super flexible and use a lot of individualized assessment approaches. So if we're looking at our individual um, theoretical framework, we're looking at constructivism, self-determination theory, and also the trauma theory. There's always room for improvement in whatever you're doing. So using growth-based rubrics and self-reflection allows students to take ownership of learning. Choice-based assessments make learning more accessible and more authentic. So we always are looking for room to improve with our kiddos. Impacts of improvements. These improvements we see increased motivation, reduced behavioral incidents. So we see less fights, less arguments, the less truancy, and we see stronger academic readiness. Now, this is after time. Those relationships have to be built first. Number one is relationship. Remember, we say that growth over grades, and the grades will come. So, in summary, I would like to talk about trauma-informed teaching supports high-risk youth. And I would just like to say whether it's a high-risk youth or a low-risk youth or a medium-risk youth, trauma-informed teaching supports students. I think it's a holistic, I feel from my experience, it is a holistic approach that should be utilized in every classroom. Relationships drive motivation and assessments support growth. Practical implications, alternative education. So obviously we use it for alternative methods. Any type of SEL program. These can be used for those programs, which we do have mentoring programs, mentoring and intervention settings. These practices can be used in those areas as well as I'd like to say it can be used in everyday parenting. These methods can be utilized. And I have a list here of our references. And I just want to say thank you for taking time out to listen to my slideshow today.